Welcome back to The Fallen Fruit. We're The Fallen Fruit. I'm Catherine Urban.
Stephanie Janese.
Lynette Ramos.
And today we are offering you our fourth episode, and we are talking about the dark moon phase. So we're talking about the dark moon phase because we kind of took a little hiatus.
Yeah.
A little bit of a pause.
Pause, which was necessary.
Yeah.
You have to take a pause.
We had a lot of personal stuff that we needed to tend to, and it was good. And, you know, sometimes you do need to check out for a little bit. So,
Yeah. I feel like, especially in this society where it's always produce, like, what have you done today? What, like, productivity levels, and you always see those memes like, you have as many hours in the day as Beyonce. And it's like, well, Beyonce probably has like an on-call therapist and a chef. And you're like, I have to do all this shit by myself. So while I'm also drowning in debt and I don't get to vacation in St. Bart's. So
right. We're not all Beyonce.
No.
Unfortunately.
Bless her. I love her. But
so the dark moon phase, it is something that is very natural and something that occurs in nature. And like Stephanie mentioned, like we live in a society where there's a lot of emphasis on productivity, like the yang of, you know, as opposed to valuing the yin, valuing the dark part of our nature. And we see this in the seasons. You know, we have winter is like the period of darkness and hibernation and revitalization. Beneath the soil in the winter, the roots are doing their thing. They're kind of shrinking together, gathering power, preparing to reburst forth in bloom in the spring. And so sometimes we need that sleep like we do every night. We go to sleep to recharge our batteries. We can't just stay on all the time.
Yeah, that's how we burn out. And as you mentioned, in society, it's almost like it's supposed to be linear, like A, B, C, D, but it's not necessarily that way. It may be cyclical. It may be where you have to repeat a certain pattern. And so sometimes when we feel like we're not going in this linear fashion and things don't make logical sense, we may feel like we're off, but we may be following more of the natural cycles than we think.
Exactly.
yeah, I mean, and like you said, with the roots, like in the winter underground, the roots are doing their thing, which is essentially what we were doing on a personal level, you know, taking care of home, taking care of our foundations, our roots, the things that kind of keep us planted here on earth. And you have to. So the end of winter and beginning of spring, which is still like the second part 2 of winter here in Cleveland. So we were, tending the roots still, getting ready for spring. And like now it's starting to finally feel like that season of blooming.
And for me, it was quite literally my roots. Like my husband and I, we, you know, just to share a personal story, like my husband and I, we were told that we had 60 days to move out of our house. So that sent us on an urgent search for another place to live. And of course, it ended just fine. Like, we're totally fine. But I just needed to tend to my roots and pull, like, just to my central needs. And yeah. So, but here we are.
Yeah.
We made it out.
Yes.
We're peeking out. Like, you can see our little seedling heads.
You need to root so you can rise, as they say in yoga sometimes. And, you know, so like the period of winter, you know, we're tending to the roots, really anchoring in, preparing. It's also a reflective period. So these dark periods of the cycle are very, very valuable for reflection. And then, of course, you blossom in the spring, and then you come into full bloom in the summer, and then you start to kind of fall away in the fall. And this cycle is everywhere in nature. This cycle is, you know, it follows like the moon, the dark phase of the moon. It culminates to the full moon, and we get a new moon phase every month. Really.
Yeah, and it also makes me think of like childbirth, that time where it's like things are blooming or things are growing, but you can't see them yet. And sometimes it can be painful and uncomfortable. And I think that it's really about using kind of our chemical way of taking something and using it for our benefit. So it's like, okay, this might be painful or uncomfortable. And going back to what you said about introspection, what do I need to learn here? What have I been missing? How can I move forward more efficiently? What can I do to move forward more with more power and more wisdom? And then even when we give birth, it can be painful, but then ask any mother or most mothers, once it's born, it's like you look back and realize, wow, there was such beauty in that process. And I feel so joyful and so grateful now, but during the process, we don't feel that way.
And there's so much value there. Think about all the preparation that you're doing,
right?
All the psychic communication that you're doing with your new creation.
I think even when it comes to art or creativity or whatever you're passionate about, there are those times where you're not producing as much, you're not putting it out there, but the work's still being done, and me as a writer, sometimes I'll only jot down a few lines in my notebook, and then I'll get down on myself oh, I haven't written anything, and then I have to stop and think well, I did write something. Maybe it was just 2 lines, but it was something. Or even if you're reading, you're still taking it in. You're still getting the ingredients you need, for the pot of soup, and eventually it will be done and it will nourish you and the people that you love. But while it's happening, while you're chopping everything and you're like, God, this fucking sucks. I hate chopping onions. I gotta chop 2 of these, chopping all this stuff. And you're like, ugh, I feel like it's never going to be done. Yeah. But when it is done, it's the most beautiful, most rewarding.
But it's like seeds, you plant them and they don't bloom that day. And so it's a matter of, again, we live in a society that kind of makes us feel bad if we're not being productive to the max. And there are periods in life where there is a readiness to be in that full swing of doing, right? But can't be expected to be there all the time.
No. Yeah. And I think a lot of teachings will try to rush you out of that phase. Oh, be positive. Oh, here's a technique to take you out of that sadness or take you out of that dark place. But going back to an artist, some of the greatest singers, why did they have this amazing piece of work? Is because they had the breakup right. Or they had some sort of rejection and they had to go in and fight and cry and feel like they weren't going to get out of this space, but then they were able to bring such beauty. So it's again, it's not comfortable during the process, but it's finding the beauty. How can we, it's hard to sit in sadness or sit when things are building because we want to hurry up and get out of that. So it's how can we sit back? I had an experience that taught me it's when you're going through something and you're trying to push forward, instead of trying to rush to that next place, it's just lean into where you are.
Yeah.
And it kind of showed me that the universe has this timing and this process that there's so many steps that have been figured out that we can't see. But again, it's this pacing, and we have to really be able to kind of connect with where we are instead of trying to, again, force ourselves out of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, there's so much value then in these dark periods. And I think that, when we're in that full swing of productivity, that's more like our sun. That's more like the yang energy of putting out, And we live in a culture where we don't place as much value on the dark, on the yin periods. And we see that everywhere in the way that we treat old people, the way that we treat people of color, the way that we treat people who aren't contributing to society in the workforce. So we find that there's not a whole lot of support for these people. And so what can we do? I also think that we see that with death, our relationship with death. We fear what we don't understand, right? But I feel as a culture, there's so much value in that rite of passage, and we just haven't opened up to collectively understand it better or have more support through that rite of passage.
Yeah. Like, funny, quick little story. So my oldest son was doing a poetry prompt at school, and it was like, they gave you like the first few words, and then you had to finish the line. So it was like, I am, I feel, I want, I hear, I see, I am. But his took on this very sort of like morbid tone, I guess, according to the teacher. Like, the teacher's great, but she called me like, I'm just concerned. The poem is like, I feel, or I hear death calling. I feel my ancestors nearing. And it's like this poem about death and like the impending sort of like doom of it. And he's 11, and the poem was really great though. I was like, wow, like very, emotional. It painted a picture. As a poet myself, I was like really proud, but
yeah, this is your child.
But yeah, and then everyone's like, but where, like, the school psychologist is like, I'm just a little concerned. And I asked him about it, and he's like, yeah, I think about death, and it's scary to think, these people won't be here anymore. So I tried to sit down and like talk to him and be like, that's why we have religion. It gives people hope in this big unknown. Like, nobody knows. That's one of life's biggest mysteries, is what happens when we die. It's kind of sad or shitty to think it's just lights out and that's it. So we kind of cling to something, because if not, then it is like, what's the purpose? Yeah. And that can be a really dark in a more negative sense to be. Like, at least seeing the darkness and seeing something on the other side, whatever it is you believe, that like gets you through. So that's why I was like, well, people believe in reincarnation. People believe in heaven and hell. People believe,
That's really cool.
So he felt a little bit better, needless to say, but,
And like you said, I think the teachers were well-meaning, but to me, the fact that he can talk about it, to me, is more healthy, right? Because if we don't talk about it, if we act like that's not our reality, then to me, he may have more of a challenge as he gets older. Because some people, obviously, that's one of our biggest fears, is death. Right. So to me, I appreciate the fact that you're able to even have those conversations, because these are the things that we need to like address, instead of trying to just sweep under the rug, like, and not deal with it.
And I told the counselor, I was like, well, we do have like an ancestral altar in our dining room. So every day he eats breakfast, he's looking at like his great grandparents or all these people that have passed on. And it's like, hey,
it's in his face.
We talk about it often.
Yeah, so it's good. It's healthy to talk about. Yeah, that's awesome that you guys are open about
When you brought up the altar, were they like, okay, well, anyway, thanks a lot. We really appreciate you talking to us about this, and then ended the conversation. Like,
no, they were great. They like sent me a copy, and
Well, they say that I guess in the movie Coco that they did,
I haven't seen it. Okay.
They talk about the 3 deaths, and the first is like the awareness that one day you will die.
Okay.
And then the second is when you die. And then the third is the last time someone speaks your name.
Yeah, like nobody remembers you in the living world anymore. And I love that movie. Yeah. I mean, we've also watched it a bunch with the kids, so,
Yeah, and like he's 11, and then when you get around the age of 11 or 12, you get what's called your Jupiter return. And the Jupiter return is basically carries a lot of themes of Jupiter. And Jupiter deals with understanding the bigger picture. And, around that age, you start to learn that there's like a whole big world out there. And a lot of people buy their first like tarot, or I bought my first astrology book at age 12, because you start asking those questions.
Yeah.
And Jupiter in astrology often deals with abundance and good luck and prosperity and all the good things. But like, of course, you can have too much of a good thing. So there's also downsides that come with Jupiter. But for the most part, it's a benefic planet. It's real positive. It's about growth. It's about understanding. It's about what's possible. But oddly enough, you'll see Jupiter associated with death. When someone dies, you'll see they're having a Jupiter transit, because a lot of times you're expanding beyond your physical body. You're freeing from your incarceration. You see what I mean?
I like it.
So he's probably right there at his Jupiter return.
I never thought about it like that with Jupiter. Like so much abundance that you literally transcend the physical body.
Yeah.
Mind blown. I just transcended that fucking plane of thought. Thanks, Catherine.
Yeah. Whereas Pluto is the planet that deals with death and rebirth and transmutation and also healing. We're still actually getting to understand Pluto because we only discovered Pluto 100 years ago. And generally, you need to see the planet go the whole way around the zodiac to have a full understanding of what that planet's gifts are. And so Pluto's orbit is 248 years. So we haven't seen it go all the way through. But the interesting thing is that when someone gets a Pluto transit, they're usually asked to die, let go, regenerate that area of life. And so we have physical death, but we also have death of things in our lives. We have so many different cycles going on at one time or another. And I mean, how many times have you gone through life and something happens where you're like, I need to let that die. I need to let that go. I need to change. I need to shed my skin.
Yeah. I mean, life is full of just tiny deaths. Like every day you're letting go of something. Something's changing. You're letting go of a thought pattern, a behavior, even just like negative self-talk, you know. You're constantly trying to let go of all the shit.
I know there have been times for me where it's like I had to let go of something and I did it reluctantly. And it was actually, I felt like it wasn't my choice. I felt like it was this universal, just like, we're going to make this decision for you. And then on the other side of it, of course, I got something else that was beautiful that I would have maybe not had if my hand wasn't forced in a way. So it's one of those things that's like, it takes this immense amount of surrender and faith because you're like, this can't be positive for me. Like when it's happening, it's like, I can't see anything about this that's beautiful or positive until you go through it. And then until you can kind of look back on it. And so sometimes it's hard because we don't want to have like this sense of faith that is like delusional, right? We don't want to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to have faith in this. But it's like, how do we find faith in times where we can't see and still feel like we're making good, solid choices? And so again, sometimes these universal prompts, it's like we have no choice.
Yeah.
We feel like we don't have a way to make the decision. So
yeah.
It's interesting.
It's like do or die. So when we're talking about like, you know, going dark sort of, or retreating to like take care of the roots or something like that, you know, you talk about surrender, and mine was my relationship, and knowing that I needed to work on that and sort of surrender myself to, if I want to keep this relationship alive and strong and continue on, then I need to sort of surrender to the way I feel, as opposed to maybe, you know, thinking that I can't have everything I want all at once. My career, my ambition, the things I want to do, and be myself in all these avenues and take every part of me with me. So I was the surrender, like that word, just like, oh.
Yeah, and you know, not to get into like your personal stuff too much, but like I can see the synergy is so powerful. Like you guys were obviously in sync before, and I knew that you guys loved each other, but whatever has happened, you can see the product, and it's really beautiful and it's really powerful. And so again, that goes to our point, right? Is that it can be difficult, and it there's this sense of uncertainty of what's happening. But again, when you look back, you're like, oh, this shit is dope. Like this shit worked out.
Like, so it was worth it to be, you know, curled up in a ball crying a couple nights for the outcome. But like when you're in it, it's just so hard to see the other side.
It's messy.
Beautiful to see on the other side. But yeah, like, you know, sometimes in order to get to that other side, you have to face, you know, what do I have to let go of? What is needed to let go here, you know? And, you know, speaking about shedding skin and, you know, like the snake. And we're going to talk more about snake medicine in our next episode. But, you know, the idea of shedding one's skin and how uncomfortable that is to be in that place. But those of us who menstruate, there is also a shedding that occurs every month. And so those of us who menstruate are a little bit more in tune with this more rapidly occurring and more regularly occurring cycle of ovulation and shedding. You know, like we go through that.
I spoke with a shaman. He's originally from Colombia, but we were in Costa Rica, and we were in a ceremony that I had to deal with kind of the masculine and feminine dynamic, and how women historically have been very powerful spiritually, very connected with the unseen, but yet in certain roles we are the subordinate, we're the helper. And I had a real issue with that, and it came up for me. And so I had a conversation with him, and he talked about that. He said women have a natural way of cleansing, a natural way of being tapped into their intuition, and men have to kind of work at that. They have to find another way to do that. And so I think that it's an opportunity for us as women to honor that process. And then I feel like for men, it's like they have to find a way for them to do that too. How can they do the cleansing? How can they have that time of introspection? Yeah. And so I think that some of the imbalances is because men are not encouraged to do something like that. And it could look differently, but I feel like they should find a way to do that.
Well, yeah. So like the cycle of the moon, you know, and historically the moon has traditionally been associated with women because it's instinctual, it's primal, it is like that psychic impulse, right? And then the sun is more like the hero journey, and that was historically more taken on by men. But nowadays we all have a sun, we all have a hero journey, and we all have a moon. And so in modern astrology, we're not saying like, oh, the moon represents the women in your life and the sun is the men. It can, but like you also, you know, are encouraged to embody both of those things. So when we look at the moon and the menstrual cycle, that happens every month. And that's actually where we get the word moon, month. It's the same word. But the sun goes through these cycles too. So again, we have like the seasons, you know, that's really dictated by the sun. And men, of course, have their own cycles of shedding and rebirth too. When we get into astrology, you know, we can see that through the Pluto transits. And then there's also this really potent cycle called the progressed moon. And so basically you get like, in astrology, you enter this like weird fourth dimensional realm where a day equals a year. So for example, if there was a new moon 14 days after you were born, then around the age of 14, you would go through that dark phase of shedding and rebirthing. And I had my own progressed new moon cycle happen a few years ago. And it was like right after I started studying astrology, right after I went through like my obsessive phase. And then some shit happened in my life that forced me to let go. And I felt very unproductive, and I felt very alone, very low energy. But then, you know, I'm coming out of that now, and I'm able to see how much value that period had in my life. And so everyone goes through this at different times in their life. So if you were born on a full moon, you would go through it around the age of 14. You would also go through it again in about 30 years, because we're going by the progressed, like the moon phase. So a moon phase is about 30 days.
That's interesting. I'm going to have to look at my son's chart, because I always joke that my son didn't go through terrible 2s. He went through terrible 5s and then terrible like 13, 14. Like for some reason he had like all of this anger and this like, he has a lot of power, but he was using it in a manipulative way. And even his guidance counselor would tell me like, he's a natural leader. He's just not using his ability in the most productive way. So I'm going to have to look at that, because he really dealt with a lot of anger and frustration and stuff around that time.
Yeah, we can definitely look at that. And yeah, progressions in astrology are really cool, because it makes it so personal. And then it really does give life to the idea that like your natal chart, your birth chart is a seed, and it's literally like uncoiling. Like you are born with this cosmic clock. And of course it brings up the question of fate and free will. And in astrology, of course, there's an intermingling of both, because some things you see it's lined up from your birth.
Yeah.
And then it's up to you what you do with it.
That could be a whole other podcast.
Oh,
that's
right.
a fascinating
Yeah.
topic for me.
Yeah.
And that's really controversial. There's so much that we need to talk about
But
that.
yeah, just I only bring it up because, again, everyone, no matter if you're identifying with yin or yang, male or female, or non-binary energy, you know, you have a progressed moon cycle. You will have Pluto transits, and you're going to get old. You know, age is another dark moon phase. You know, once you start to get up there in age, you know, once you get into your 80s, you start talking about death. You start talking to death. You start talking to your ancestors. I mean, because you're there.
You're there.
Yeah. It was one of my friends whose grandmother recently passed. She was like 100. And she said in the last few weeks that she'll be laying there and, you know, in Spanish, be talking about, oh, look, it's Jesus. Like, somebody get him a coffee. And it was like, and they were like, we didn't know if she was going crazy or if, like, for real, like, somebody was coming to get her. And it's so funny that, like, the first thing she thought was like, yeah, get him a plate, get him some coffee.
You guys got that Bustelo around?
Yeah. And,
Tinto.
but I think I've heard stories, and even with my experience with my elders passing, like that they start to see maybe their spouse who's passed on, or other relatives, or maybe even their children, or just somebody on that other side, quote unquote, and they start to see them and like talk and reach out. And I'm like, well, I think for sure it's because they're like half between here and there. And thinking about that dark moon phase, that's what, you know, when my son, we were talking about different religions or faiths or what you believe the afterlife is, you know, I told him, I'm like, I believe, you know, the way that the moon is. The dark side of the moon is where the unborn and the no longer living kind of intermingle, and all that energy is just there. And then when somebody is born, pieces and parts of all that energy come in to make them. And I think that's why we have like deja vu, or you know, if you meet somebody and you're like, I feel like I've met you before, I've known you before, it might be that you did, like, pieces of your cosmic energy met in a previous life. And it might not necessarily be you. You know, that's very egotistical of us to think like, oh, I've done this before. Pieces of you have, but I don't think you as a whole person.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, I like that theory a lot. I think about that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even coming to when we talk about like end of life, like we've had this conversation before where like people find their voice. You know, maybe they were more, you know, kind of reserved and submissive, and then as they come to this point where they're ready to transition, or they're in that later phase of life, they like, listen, I'm just going to tell it like it is. This is my opinion. Take it or leave it. And so again, I think these are things we can learn, that, you know, how can we start using that energy now? How can we start using these transitions and phases for the benefit of us and our families and stuff, instead of being afraid of it or shying away from it?
Yeah. And when we start to do that, you know, that is going to reverberate into society, you know, having a better relationship with rest. You know, there's like the nap ministry you see online that's like, take a nap. You're allowed to take a nap.
I love a nap.
Yeah.
And I think it's part of our process. It's part of the divine feminine, or however you want to think about it. There is a new force being awakened, and as it starts to come in, you know, we have to start integrating. We have to start finding, you know, remembering the value in this, in the dark, because it really is a part of nature. It's this rhythmic cycle of nature, and to try to be the sun all the time. Like that's exhausting.
Yeah, you would burn out if the sun didn't get an opportunity to maybe rest, so to say. I mean, it's not really resting, it's on the other side of the planet, but you know, yeah, if it constantly stayed on one side, then some of us would be it's too much sun. How would you sleep? How would you regenerate? How would you rest? And then the other side, just constantly in the dark, would be pretty upset and depressed, I feel like.
It makes me think of hypnosis because there's a lot of myths around what it is, and people are afraid to unleash or tap into what they don't know. And so it's almost this idea that, oh, if I don't address it, if I don't open up that box, it won't bother me, when it's really the complete opposite. What we don't look at, what we don't address is going to kind of fester and it's going to be something that plays out in our life subconsciously that we don't even see it, but it's like seeping in through. And even like, you know, my son, like we've talked about, he's a Scorpio, he's 20 years old, and we've talked about sexuality and desires. And I always talk to him about like, if there's something that you want to explore, find a way to do it that doesn't hurt anyone and that's healthy. But don't just act like you don't want that.
That's awesome.
Yeah, because I feel like if we can bring these things to the forefront, have conversations around them, just acknowledge that this is a part of who we are. So I think that as a whole, you know, I just encourage us to look into those dark places.
Yeah.
Instead of letting them kind of just come out in a way that isn't so good for everyone.
Yeah. I feel like even especially in relationships, not just intimate romantic relationships, but if you're not talking about those parts of you, or, you know, if you're even committing your life to somebody and you haven't discussed, maybe here are these sort of weird kinks I have or these darker, maybe taboo desires. If you're not willing to go there with that person, then you probably shouldn't be with them, because then it's going to, like you said, like a Pandora's box. It just sort of seeps out, and then that's when it becomes, you know, a family unraveling because two people weren't honest with each other about who they were or what they were, you know, essentially. And then you have this collateral damage that then affects these children, then because everybody's trying to pretend, oh no, I like the farmer's market and monogamy, it's my favorite. And it's like,
I love
it's not, you know, like if you like to be choked out a little bit, just say that to the person you're with.
I'm sure, and they may love it too.
They may love it too. You could still go to the farmer's market, but like maybe you went maybe you went to a sex club the night before. Like, you know, balance, duality. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and if you're conscious of it, then yes, absolutely. And then, you know, sometimes you go through the dark period at the time with your partner, and things kind of come to light, and like, yes, like, address it as it comes up. For sure.
But definitely stuffing it down is, we've just seen by
well, I think that unfortunately that's when we look at religion, you know, they've kind of set the pace for certain things, right? So it's like, you know, don't have sex before you get married. You know, as a woman, you're supposed to be like this prim and proper, and you know, but then you have priests molesting children, right? So it's like, that's, you know, what happens. Wouldn't it just be better if you were just a little freaky and just like, this is who I am, and then you're not hurting anyone in the process? So
that's what happens when the shadow gets repressed.
It turns, like, unfortunately very ugly and very harmful. And
so there's value in the shadow. There's value in the slower, more introverted, regenerative periods in our lives. There's value in letting go. There's value in death. There's value in reflectiveness and not being productive all the time. So what else can we say to wrap up here?
I think maybe we can talk about some ways, what are some ways we can work through that dark phase, you know, like even having conversations like this with people that you trust. Definitely. And if you're having a hard time, or you have something that is really shameful for you, or just difficult, you know, finding someone that you trust to talk through it. So I just think that we have to look at practical ways of dealing with this, because it's super easy to talk about, but it's not so easy to process the information and to sit in that uncomfortable place. So
I think yeah. Go ahead. No.
I was just going to say, I think sometimes just knowing what time it is in your life is helpful, because, you know, otherwise you're just get caught up with like, I got to keep pushing forward. I got to keep going. But when you keep drawing the Tower card in tarot, or if you know through your astrology transits or progressions what time it is in your life, then I think it really does help you to understand, okay, this is what time it is. It's time to like cut away the dead, you know, like the shoots on my stalk that have withered, and they're just, you know, it's time to like cut them off.
Yeah. I think doing introspective things that feel good and feel productive in a sense that like it's producing that feeling of goodness or even just a little bit of happiness during those dark times. So reach out maybe to like a healer or a tarot reader. If, you know, that seems a little daunting, even, you know, pick up a tarot book or like a tarot deck for yourself, and maybe pick up a new hobby while you're at home. Not like a hobby, but a practice. And, you know, you can find decks online for like used for like $15 or tarot swaps or something. But just finding something that brings you joy, maybe getting into a yoga or a meditative practice, or reading books that make you feel good, watching things that make you feel good, listening to music that makes you feel at least maybe even understood or seen, or just something you can relate to. Feeling like you're not alone, I think, is the most important.
Yeah, no, for sure. And also being okay with taking space to be alone is important too. And I remember when I was going through this phase of my life that I mentioned, I was in my obsessive astrology phase, and my teacher, his name is John Marcusella, he told me, okay, Catherine, like you're in your balsamic moon phase. That's the name for the last phase of the moon, the balsamic moon. And when we think about balsam, like it's like the incense, it's a spiritual time. If you think about when you burn incense, it's like I'm making offerings, I'm connecting, I'm asking for guidance, because the light is diminishing in my life. And I was going through a yoga teacher training at the time, and he's like, yeah, you know, this is a period where education is about all this period is good for. Because, I mean, not everyone is going to seek to connect spiritually, but like, what are you connecting with? Connect with something bigger. Connect with something that gives you context and meaning and the ability to kind of synthesize. And like, again, like as things kind of fade away, you know, like you said, like having things to kind of support you along the way. And I like to think too that like when you have menstrual cramps, what do? You are gentle with yourself. Yeah. You do maybe some yin yoga. You have your hot pack. You've got your cookies, you know, taking it easy.
Yeah. And it's trusting and try not to compare, because we're all at different cycles and different phases. And so it's really hard if you're going through, you know, like that dark night of the soul or whatnot, and you see someone else flourishing and advancing, but you don't know when their phase was.
Right.
And so even one of my cousins the other day said an overnight success takes 10 years. Yeah. So it's like, we don't know the people that are around us or that we see. What did they have to go through? What did they have to let go of? So we only see the finished product. So we just really have to trust in our own process.
You can't judge the journey off the finished product.
Not at all.
No.
And there was this meme I saw the other day, and it wasn't a meme. It said, it was from Coven's Instagram. It said, stop being jealous of people in their winning season. You don't know what they lost in their losing season.
Ooh,
and that's true. So has everything to do with what we're talking about.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about too, because I loved that. Yeah.
Cool.
Dope.
So I guess that about wraps this episode up. Thank you so much for joining us on The Fallen Fruit. And you can find us. Where can people get in touch with you guys? Where can people follow you?
You can follow me on Instagram at st period GINESE. Janaise, it's my last name. Yeah, I usually post on there. I'm pretty adamant about it. And you can see what I'm doing, and my website link is there and all that fun stuff. What about you, Lynette?
You can find me on Instagram at Lynette, LYNETTE period Maris, MARIS 3, or at my website, LynetteRamos.com.
Cool. And then you can find me. I'm Astro Catherine on Instagram, and that is Catherine with a C. So stay tuned. We have more episodes of The Fallen Fruit coming right up for you. So yeah.
Peace.
Peace.
Bye.